Breaking Bad, one of the things that people have, people who've watched the show have complained about is, so the show, starts and the main character has terminal cancer and is given a short time to live, yet it's gone on for 4 seasons. How is that realistic? Well, the show has gone on for 4 seasons, but the story time has not. In fact, the first 4 seasons take up only 1 year of story time. And so if you analyze it some, or you read some of the analyses, like this article, How Much Time Has Passed on Breaking Bad, you can understand, okay, it's a highly compressed story time in which the actual sort of plot and screen time is much more drawn out. There's also the ability to map story time onto real time. In terms of history. So a good example of that is Mad Men. So Mad Men, fans have created timelines to try to place the narrative onto the history. So here's a chronology. So in 1962, here's where each episode happened. There's a column that says Mad Men events, and then the third column, which says date, lists key historical moments and try to understand this is historically what's happening in the 1960s. That is either referenced on the show or provides context for the show. So again, attempting to orient yourself in this complex chronology through history. So calendaring becomes a mode of orientation practice as well. Now, even when the story world is not realistic in the least, mapping chronology and calendars can be a crucial orientation strategy. Probably the most complicated timeline on television is Doctor Who, which, if you don't know, is a British show. It's been running for over 40 years, and it follows a time traveler. So obviously, there's a lot of temporal complexity there, both the really, really long screen time, and then the fact that the show itself has covered pretty much every possible moment in span in human and other alien history. So trying to map that can be very difficult, and fans do that on things like fan wikis and other fan resources. But specifically, there's a plot line that has emerged in the past 2 seasons with another character named River Song, who's another time traveler. And River Song and Doctor Who have a romantic relationship, but since they're both time travelers, they experience their temporalities quite differently, and fans need to try to figure that out. So we can see here a number of different maps that fans have created to try to orient themselves. This last one is fairly playful. I don't think that the goal is to really make sense of things, but a lot of them are to try to understand how is it that River's temporality matches or maps onto the Doctor's. And this is not just the domain of fans. A lot of these practices are done by the industry themselves. So the BBC created a video where they had the actress who played River Song narrate her history chronologically, which goes sort of counter to the chronology of the screen time and story time as we experienced. So there's very interesting sort of playful reorientation happening there. Now, one of the most interesting ways that fans create orientation tools is through the use of video remixes that can recast the original series in interesting ways. So 2 Lost projects, I think, speak to this. One is this online video called Lost: The Synchronizing.
Never been a very good flyer.
Maybe hard to see here. It's pretty brief, but if you can see that there are a little better. There are a number of split-screen videos here, and sort of what has played out is a fan went ahead and took all the footage that depicts either the plane crash or events that are happening on the island at the time of the plane crash and synced them up. At one point in the video, there are, I think, 8 split screens happening simultaneously, and the goal is to say, this is story time. This is what is happening at this moment on September 24th, 2004 in this story world. But then the actual plot time and screen time from this is quite different because these clips come from 3 seasons of the show, so spanned out in different moments. And this is obviously a pretty ambitious and fun project. I think that another one is even larger scale, which is this website called Chronologically Lost. A fan has re-edited the entire show chronologically. So starting from the earliest moment in story time, for those who know the show, the episode Across the Sea, that takes place in the sort of Jacob and Man in Black's childhood. And then charting that forward to arranging every flashback and every time travel in order of the show itself. Now, I don't know how many people will sit down and rewatch the show this way. It's obviously a very sort of, unnatural way to watch the show, and it runs counter to a lot of the dramatic storytelling that the show is predicated on. However, I think as an experiment, it really speaks to the way in which fans are thinking through these elements. And I do know that a lot of people have read through his blog where he talks about each episode and thinking about, oh, okay, this is how these all piece together. So what we see here is a range of different orienting paratexts that some are playful, some are designed to sort of highlight the ways in which this is complex, and others are designed to simplify, to orient us in a way that helps us understand, make sense of things. And I think that we can think about orientation in these different ways through some other categories that I want to lay out here. The first is recapitulation. The goal is to tell us, to recap what happened. Understanding the narrative material in a straightforward manner. Another is more analysis, analytically exploring narrative material via a representational mode like a map or video that tries to go beyond just telling us what happened, but to analyze the significance or highlight certain parallels or contradictions. And then the third is expansion, looking outward from the text, extra-textually, to connect the series to realms of other story worlds or real worlds. And these are general impulses. I think they can certainly blur and blend together, but they're useful. So if we then create a little matrix, because we're orienting ourselves here, we can see here's a sort of orientation of orientation, a meta-orientation map, if you will, that we can see, these different impulses play out in different forms. So you can have a, recapitulation of the plot time chronology, or more of an analysis of the plot time chronology. You see the expansion there with time is a little tricky. So there I really see the tie to history that Mad Men is an example of. And that these three elements of recapitulation and analysis and expansion can be applied to other dimensions as well. So if you remember, I know I'm throwing a lot of categories at you here. Initially we had four areas, time, and then the second one is events. So events can be recapitulated as well. So that's essentially a plot recap. It's sort of one of the most standard and most well-established modes of orientation. What happens when? How did this play out? What happened in this episode? Really focus on retelling us the events. So here you can see an official plot recap from an episode of Breaking Bad that's on AMC's website. Some of those are tied to the show itself. So the previously on segments that precede a lot of serial television serve as an internal paratext to the show, providing a framework to understand, okay, what has happened in the past that's important for this episode. Now, a lot of questions of events also jumps into analysis as well, detaching the narrative events from their chronology to create a different perspective on the story. So this would be things like lists of character deaths that are found on a series wiki, or visual depictions of things. And this is one of my favorite of sort of innovative orienting paratexts. This is a graphic that a fan made of Dexter's victims. And it's an infographic, so again, you can't probably see much there, but it analyzes the show, weapons of choice, where what type of kill each murder was, which episode it happened in down below, and then a timeline of these kills. There's a ton of information here, and it's completely abstracted from the storytelling. There's a real sense of this is a graphic depiction of what has happened on this show. And it's very stylish to boot. Now, sometimes these analytic reinterpretations try to explore them not just for abstraction, like we see here with Dexter, but also to analyze for causality or significance, or maybe even comprehension, trying to understand, so what really happened here? I think this is especially true when dealing with these narrative enigmas that I talked about yesterday. So a good example of this is Breaking Bad. In the next to last episode of season 4, an episode called End Times, a child is poisoned, and there's ambiguity as to who did that. So that's a narrative enigma. We know that the kid was poisoned. We don't know who did it. So that's a sort of mystery, trying to look back to understand it. And the episode ends with the cliffhanger. And in that gap, that week-long gap until the next episode, fans spent a lot of time trying to figure out, so what really happened, how does this make sense? And one fan created a video which he attempted to prove that Walter White was responsible for this poisoning, and he did it using these sort of the remix techniques. So let me show you a brief little clip of that to get a sense of how remix video can be a tool of analysis in this case of events.
Poison a child to give him. I have been waiting. I've been waiting all day. Waiting for Gus to send one of his men to kill me.
So, and this goes on, and I won't. For those of you who haven't seen it, I won't reveal whether he was right or not. But he did a very detailed analysis, and this type of analytical work, I think, is a key part of how people use orienting practices and paratexts to make sense of these shows, and using this mode that I've talked about of forensic fandom, of really, here literally attempting to mull the crime scene and find all this evidence in a way that you might, obviously, on CSI they don't make remix videos, but they certainly analyze what happened in similar detail. And then we also have plot expansions, attempts to contextualize events in a larger intertextual web. Sometimes that ties to the real world, like with Mad Men. So for instance, Treme, this show about post-Katrina New Orleans, there are bloggers who annotate every episode, trying to say, okay, this happened in the show, this is what really happened in New Orleans at this time, or here's that restaurant that they referenced, or here's this band that they referenced, here's a sort of real world, attempting to map that on, to give a, like an annotated novel would sort of explain all the references that might be in a given book. The same thing is being done with these serialized television shows every episode. More rare are examples of trying to connect narrative events from one series to another fictional world. And I think the sort of extreme case of this is one of my favorite fan practices in television history, which is the Tommy Westphall universe theory. There was a 1980s medical show called St. Elsewhere, and it was well known for having a twist ending, and the ending was, the entire thing took place in a hospital, and one of the main characters had an autistic son. And in the last scene of the final episode, they cut to this apartment that we'd never seen before. And the main doctor came in, and he wasn't a doctor, he was a construction worker. And his son, Tommy, this autistic boy, was sitting there staring into a snow globe that had a hospital in it. And the doctor, slash construction where her father said, "I wonder what he sees in there." And this whole idea was the entire show was in his mind, was this fantasy that